So yeah, I've started the recording. So we will hear about using AI to create value for businesses. And I'm very happy to have Jim Sporer on the program. You have been on our program before. You were there 2 years ago, and you've been actually several times. And I have to say that you've been an inspiration for both myself and for Stephen Isel to work on service innovation, where you were one of the pioneers way back. And we have followed your work, and it's so good to have you on our program to talk about the future of AI and business value. So let me just give the attendees a short bio. So Jim directs IBM open source artificial intelligence developer ecosystem effort. He led IBM Global University programs, co-founded Almaden Service Research, and was CTO Venture Capital Group. So after Jim's MIT Bachelor of Science in Physics, he developed speech recognition systems at Verbex before receiving his Yale PhD in computer science / AI. So in the 1990s, Jim Sporer attained Apple Computer's Distinguished Engineer, Scientist, and Technologist role for the next generation learning platforms. And with over 90 publications and 9 patents, he received the Gummerson Service Research Award, Vargo and Lush Service Dominant Logic Award, Daniel Berg Service Systems Award, and a PICMET Fellow for Advancing Service Science. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Jim. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Petter. This is a great opportunity to chat with you all today. I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions because I find I learn the most when people are asking questions. So please do reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Twitter. I'm on Slack if any of you do that. There's my Gmail, probably the easiest. And down at the bottom, you'll see a link to the slideshare.net/Sporer if you want a copy of this presentation that's already posted. I will call out in the upper right-hand corner, I am on the board of directors of the International Society of Service Innovation Professionals, which you can all join as well if you'd like to stay in touch on service innovation and future of AI projects. As Petter said, this is my bio. The one thing I just added down here is I'm also the Linux Foundation Data and AI Technical Advisory Council chairperson, and I'm on the, if for people who know a little AI open source, I'm also on the ONIX steering committee. And just briefly, you know, my interests come from my interest in systems. And I think broadly, we all know about natural systems. I learned about them at MIT while I was studying physics and other things there. Then I got interested in cognitive systems, how the brain works, artificial intelligence, and got my PhD at Yale. But when I got to IBM, which was about 23 years ago, after Apple for 10 years, I got very interested in what we call service systems, which are a type of socio-technical system. Businesses, of course, are these kinds of organizational systems. And I have to say, service systems are the most fascinating of all. And you may be wondering, you know, how did I get interested in service systems? And well, it's because of revenue. Many companies increasingly through their digital transformation make the bulk of their revenue through service, not so much the hardware, the software, but offering service. And so the study of service has become, you know, my primary preoccupation. And in this talk today, we'll see how it overlaps with artificial intelligence for creating business value. My day job at IBM is a director of our Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies. And there's a lot I can say about open source data and AI. I'll touch on it a bit. I'll say the main thing that we've done is we've donated a lot of software into open source around artificial intelligence, especially in the area of trusted AI. So if you think, about artificial intelligence and do you trust it? Well, is it fair? Is it explainable? Is it robust against security attacks? So we've created at IBM Research a lot of open source code to make AI more trustworthy. And through our Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies, we've released a lot of it to the world. We also released open metadata governance technologies and a variety of other technologies that are part of the Linux Foundation Data and AI. In fact, trust is really the key concept that links these two communities that I'm involved in, the service science community and the artificial intelligence community. And I'll say a little bit more about that in this talk, but I really want to just get into the talk. And there's, a pandemic perspective, it's accelerating the digital transformation of the world, of organizations. And so that's important. There's a service science perspective that I'll get into, which is about responsible entities transforming into better future versions of themselves. And there's an artificial intelligence perspective, which is primarily around automation and collaboration with machines. And let's talk about the pandemic for a minute. This is a slide from a talk I gave a while back about how robots are, part of that digital transformation that's being accelerated by the pandemic. And there's three views I hear. This view is the most common view I hear on artificial intelligence in the press, at least, because I think it helps sell newspapers and magazines, digital versions of them. And it's really that, robots are taking away jobs, retail robots. I don't know if any of you have run into retail robots, but I run into robots quite a bit. Every time I go to my healthcare provider, they have robots cruising the halls of the medical center that I go to. Then some people say, no, robots are going to actually increase the number of jobs, and they give a couple arguments about why that's going to happen. One of the ones I like is telepresence robots. When I go to San Francisco, and Petter, I think the last time we were all together, we were in San Francisco, right around the train station, there's police robots that are on patrol, and they're telepresent. So you can actually go up and talk to a police officer who is controlling multiple of these patrol robots that are cruising on the sidewalks in San Francisco. And the robot transformation that you hear the least about, I think, in the press, but it potentially will be the biggest implication in some ways, is the robots that are coming to our homes. And my favorite robot in the home these days is one called FarmBot, because it's a robot that's like a giant 3D printer that you can put in your backyard or your front yard, and it actually grows food for you. There's also a robot called Sobot that will create clothing for you. So if you think about how much we spend on service in our home, like I live in the suburbs of Silicon Valley, and people come and mow my lawn, all kinds of maintenance on the property. People show up with deliveries. There's all kinds of ways to reduce cost of living through robots. So these are three views on just one little aspect. And I don't know if robots are common in your life yet, but over the next few decades, they'll be increasingly common. The other thing, of course, that we're familiar with as part of the digital transformation is all these platforms. And this is a nice work from 2014, I think. It's kind of old, but I did a nice job of talking about the labor platforms and the capital platforms. And I think, increasingly I find myself participating in both of these types of platforms. In fact, this is some good work that looks at the collaborative economy honeycomb. And in all of these different areas of service, healthcare, municipal space, food, culture, entertainment, education, there's increasing numbers of platforms. And, there's the interesting thing about platform is if it's designed right, because they're all competing with each other. the interesting thing about really, really well-designed platforms is there's always a way to get a service, some, benefit in your life, but there's also some way to earn money. Um, the well-designed platforms have a way to both earn and get a service. So, at IBM and as part of IZIP, we talk about the skills that you're going to need to be successful in the future. We call those T-shaped skills. They have breadth and depth. And there's some books here. Again, these slides are online if anybody's interested in these. But particularly at IBM these days, one of the first things that our new CEO, Arvind Krishna, well, I guess he's been a CEO for a year now, so he's not that new. But when he first became our CEO at IBM a year ago, one of his first statements to the employees was about, of course, the pandemic. And he mentioned that, during this pandemic, it was going to be, safety number one priority, not letting customers down number two priority. So employee safety was actually higher in his mind at the start of the pandemic than customers, because if we don't have safe employees, we can't deliver value. But the next thing he said was the skills. There's going to be a tremendous opportunity for upskilling as a result of the pandemic, and increasingly at IBM, we've been focusing on the skills and upskilling of our employees through this last year. So there's some references for those interested in this. Now let's start getting a little bit more into the main part of this talk about artificial intelligence. But I do want to make sure, as I'm talking about artificial intelligence, which is about generations of increasingly smart machines, and I'll give you a roadmap so you'll be able to tell how smart machines will be over time. I also want you to balance that with this notion of service science, which is about generations of us, people, upskilling and becoming more responsible. Because I think, if there's going to be a future that we want to live in, it's going to be a future, yes, there'll be more technology, there'll be more robots, there'll be more artificial intelligence, but we also have to make sure that there's generations of people that are more responsible entities, and service science is really focused on that transformation of people and organizations to more responsible entities. If you think about IBM, what does IBM want? IBM wants to be a better future version of itself. If you think about, yourself, well, I'll think about me. I want to become a better future version of Jim Sporer. So this notion of generations of people and the transformation of people and organizations into better, more responsible future versions of themselves is equally important as we go down deeper and deeper into the technological benefits of artificial intelligence. I'm going to skip over this slide other than pointing out this great book. If you like to read books as much as I do, put this one on your reading list. It's getting a little it's older, but it's called Non-Zero. It's The Logic of Human Destiny by Robert Wright, and it takes a very broad view over time of the evolution of progress. And progress is primarily about learning how to trust each other, being more responsible, and being able to play better and better win-win games where both sides win. And non-zero means a non-zero-sum game. A zero-sum game is if I win, you lose. A non-zero-sum game is where we both win. And that seems to be the logic. And the logic of non-zero is really the constant is competing for collaborators. And if you're in business, you're competing for collaborators constantly. You can think of your customers as collaborators. You can think of your employees as collaborators. You can think of your partners, your business partners. And if you're a platform business, this is the evolution of platform businesses, because why do the best platforms give you also an opportunity to earn and learn? Because the future is about upskilling our responsibilities as people. We also have to have income. So the best platforms not only provide a beneficial service to their customers, they also give opportunities for those customers to become more like employees. What's the difference between a customer and employee from a platform perspective? Well, you want your customers to be expert on your platform. You want your employees to be expert on your platform. So the difference is the customers are paying for the benefits while you're paying the employees to help create the benefits. That direction of the money flow is the primary distinction between employee and customer. And in the future evolution of these platforms, that distinction of the way the money flows, it's going to be bi-directional. And there's going to be some things I do as a customer where you pay me. And there's going to be, some people think of this, in terms of the freemium model, the value, but there's actually going to be real dollars flowing, both directions. When you think about your employees, your top employees, I certainly see it at IBM, how much extra effort we invest in using the resources of the organization to learn. That's an investment. We're paying our time, instead of maybe enjoying, on the weekend reading a book, maybe I will take a course on advanced quantum computing because I know that's going to be important for activities at IBM. So anyway, I'm not going to go into these next two slides deeply, but I think, if you want to understand artificial intelligence in terms of its future evolution, I urge you to take a look at Service Science and understand basically this view that we have of this ecology of responsible entities evolving over time. And you're going to see, as artificial intelligence advances, this notion of identity and reputation that we have in service science, these are going to be two things that are really, really going to change. And rather than hold you in suspense, I'll just say that in the future, as we get better and better artificial intelligence, personal assistance, in some ways, your artificial intelligence is going to know you better than you know yourself. And a lot of the interactions that you're going to be having in the future are going to be mediated through your cognitive mediators and your artificial intelligence. And I'll get into some examples of that a little later. Another way to look at service science in this broad perspective is we look at all the different industries. So we look at industries from transportation, water and waste, food product, energy, cloud. These are systems that focus on the flow of things, but we also focus on systems that support people's activities like retail, hospitality, banking, healthcare, education, and systems of governance. And we look at it from a very multidisciplinary, T-shaped person type of perspective. So anyone who's interested in that, happy to share more. So let's get into AI, since that's the topic, AI and the future of business value. I think the one question, a lot of people have is, what's the timeline for solving artificial intelligence? I'm the CEO of a business, say, and I'm not getting the value I want from artificial intelligence. I'm reading all this hype about it. I'm seeing all of these companies pushing AI on me, but where's the value? Show me the value. What's the timeline for getting the value from artificial intelligence? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Now, there is obviously a lot of value in certain things that you can get done with artificial intelligence today, but if you were to believe the hype, you might think, oh, I should be getting even more value, but that's because there's certain AI capabilities that just don't exist yet. Who are the leaders driving AI progress? What are the biggest benefits? What are the risks? What other technologies may have a bigger impact? What are the implications for stakeholders, and how should we prepare to get the benefits and avoid the risk? And this is my version of Moore's Law. This is probably the best way to understand the future of artificial intelligence. And I've been sharing this with folks for years, and people tell me it's really helped them a lot understand, when they can expect the type of artificial intelligence that, they see in the movies or expect that we'll get to someday. And it's basically, this is $1 trillion at the top. This is $1 billion line here, $1 million, $1,000, and $1. And it goes from 1960 to 2080. And the diagonals are the number of instructions that computers provide at a particular cost point. So in the 1960s, you could buy an IBM mainframe, the 360, that did 1,000 calculations per second. I know that seems ridiculously slow today, but that's what was running businesses. 1,000 instructions per second, you know, could revolutionize your accounting. By 2000, for $1,000, well, actually by about 1990, for $1,000, you can get 1 million instructions per second, you know, 20 years later. 1 billion instructions per second at $1,000 was the year 2000. A terascale is 1 million instructions per second, and that's what you can buy today. You can buy systems for $1,000 that do 1 million instructions per second. If you want to do, you know, billion instructions per second, they're just beginning to be exascale supercomputers now that can do 1 billion instructions per second. And they typically, you know, they're costing hundreds of millions of dollars to get a computer that can do 1 billion instructions per second. But it's interesting, over this next 40-year period, 20-year period, and 40-year period, you see this person's average salary here in light blue, and you see this yellow line going down the cost of a digital worker. And that's because our brains, each of us have a brain that does 1 billion instructions per second. So the human brain is doing an exascale, which is 10 to the 18th, 1 billion instructions per second. And you can see by about 2060, if Moore's law continues, we get to, for $1,000, you can buy an exascale. So you can do quite a bit with a petascale, though, and that's why this cost of digital worker is coming down here. And some people are very concerned about this. They see the cost of digital workers going down. They're worried about losing their job. I'm not worried about that, because from an entrepreneurial mindset, you look at it more like this. You look at the GDP per employee, because these digital workers, and what is a digital worker? It's just your smartphone app growing up. You probably all have hundreds of apps on your smartphones. I know I do. You know, everything from healthcare to education, to finance, to weather, to entertainment, education. All of those apps are going to grow up. They're going to have a speech interface. They're going to have an episodic memory, a human-like memory. So they're going to remember the last time they interacted with you. And so each of us is going to be, every individual with a smartphone is going to be like a manager with 100 workers, 100 digital workers. So that's the world we're headed into. And the expectations, the expectations on people are going to go way, way up. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, think of before we had cell phones, even not smartphones. Think before we had cell phones, right? How did people stay in touch? You know, remember planning where you were going to meet at a conference, or where you were going to, because you couldn't coordinate as well. So as the technology empowers us, as we get more and more digital workers, we're going to expect, you know, oh, you didn't have a chance to respond to my email? Well, why didn't your digital worker respond? You know, it's going to be very, very interesting. You know, we're going to be like managers with hundreds of digital workers, but we're going to have to be more responsible. Our digital workers are going to have greater responsibility to each other if there's going to be increased level of trust. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, this is great news. You're not just going to be a serial entrepreneur, you're going to be a parallel entrepreneur. But in order to get there, in order to get the benefits of artificial intelligence, we people have to change too. We have to become more responsible. We have to have better win-win games. We have to be able to trust more. And if we don't create a world where there's more trust, then we're going to be going into that dystopian view of artificial intelligence, which would be a great shame. Another way we can look at this progress, so this is in addition to Moore's law, and Moore's law is really about the physics of cognition. It's just how much energy is required to do a certain amount of calculations, which, you know, cognition. But the other thing that we have to look at is, and you can go to paperswithcode.com, SOTA, which SOTA stands for state of the art, and you can see lots of papers published every week about progress in artificial intelligence. But I'm telling you, we're still over here. we barely got artificial intelligence, and it requires massive amounts of computing power and massive amounts of data. But we are able to build for specific tasks, we can build artificial intelligence that can do speech recognition better than people on certain tasks. Image recognition, we can build systems that do image recognition. Language translation. For certain types of questions, like, factual questions about, the world, none of us can memorize all of Wikipedia, but we have computer systems that can ingest all of Wikipedia in a matter of minutes. So answering any factual question, yeah, we can build systems that perform better than people. But when it gets to more complex tasks, where it's not just memory of facts, but it's memories where we're creating generalizations, human-like memory, no system is capable of that. Reasoning, if it's deductive reasoning, we have computer systems now that can take 1 million variables, 10 million variables, 100 million variables, and solve for the optimal solution. No person can do that. Computers can. But when it comes to common sense reasoning, we're not close. We do not have systems that can do common sense reasoning like people, in spite of the hype. You may read about systems approaching human level common sense. Well, yeah, people write about that, but the reality is we're not there yet. Social interactions, we don't have AI systems that, yeah, we got chatbots. Chatbots aren't natural, fluent conversation like we're having now. And certainly we don't have the kind of AI you see in the movies where it's a true assistant, a true collaborator, a true, coach helping you learn, or a mediator, a cognitive mediator. And a cognitive mediator is when we finally get to the point where we have an artificial intelligence, probably around 2039, based on these leaderboards as we track the progress across these systems. A cognitive mediator is an artificial intelligence that you would trust to make certain decisions on your behalf. And let's stop and think about that for a minute, because who do you trust to make decisions on your behalf? Some people will say, nobody, only me. Other people will say, my spouse or my parents. But that is going to be an interesting time, because right around here in the 2036 to 2039, if these progress trajectories, and what you can do is you can plot it against human performance. So there's hundreds of these leaderboards that we're plotting against human performance, and we can see the increasing capabilities. Certainly over here, it's gone beyond human level capabilities here, but it requires massive computation, massive amounts of data. But eventually we get to systems that learn by watching and reading, and then systems that learn by doing and being responsible, because the only way we're going to trust our AIs to be an assistant and collaborator is we've got to trust them more. That's why IBM has donated our trusted AI out here into the open source to try to accelerate that progress. So let's move on just a bit, because there's a couple other things I want to cover before going into the Q&A. Who's winning? The red line is China publications in artificial intelligence. Blue is the US. This is Europe and Japan. In terms of companies, Microsoft was leading in publications of AI. Google has caught up. Solidly in third place is IBM. But if you look at intellectual property, IBM's been #1 in the world 28 years in a row in patents, and IBM dominates in patents of intellectual property. And increasingly, we're not only dominating in the intellectual property realm for the future of artificial intelligence, including things like quantum computers for getting to that exascale massive computation is going to be required, but also in terms of open source. We really think that in order to trust these artificial intelligences, we have to have an open source foundation. It can't be one company dominating in this world. It's got to be a better win-win game, a better collaboration where we can see the code, people have access to it. And this is fantastic for entrepreneurs because instead of all the companies, when I started the Verbex company in the 1970s doing speech recognition, boy, everything was super proprietary. And I'm very, very surprised how open we are about artificial intelligence these days. But maybe it's not surprising because trust is so fundamental. You can also look at robots per capita by country. Korea has the most industrial robots. The Nordics are doing very, very well, by the way, in terms of industrial robots. And also there's data out there. Accenture has some nice reports. McKinsey has some nice reports as well about how social policy affects the benefits that you get from robots and artificial intelligence. There's definitely a correlation. And again, I think the Nordics are doing quite well. The benefits of AI are going to be access to expertise. We're all going to be managing hundreds of digital workers in 20 years. Notice I said 2 decades away. This is not something you're going to have next year. It will be, that's the trajectory though. So your apps will be getting better. And if you don't learn how to use your apps, you're not going to be getting the benefits of artificial intelligence. You're also going to be able to make better collaboration choices. The risks of job loss, I'm not worried about that. De-skilling is what I worry about, people becoming overly reliant on technology. I'm not worried about superintelligence. That's another thing you hear about. I'm worried about bad actors using AI to manipulate things, and we're already seeing that, of course. Artificial intelligence is one of many technologies that are going to benefit us in the future. I'm also looking at augmented reality and virtual reality, blockchain for security, advanced material and energy systems. For those of you who like to invest in this kind of stuff, I encourage you to take a look at ARK Investment, A-R-K Investment. They're investing in all these next generations in a very intelligent way. Even if you don't invest, I urge you to look at the investments they're making and how they're making their investments, because it's fascinating to watch this organization invest in the future. The best way to predict the future is to inspire the next generation of students to build it better. I never turn down an opportunity to talk to students, even executive students, because I think that's really the key is we can create and build a better world. It's not easy. We have to upskill. We have to become more responsible. We have to design better systems of trust. We have to use this technology in a more responsible way. That's not easy, especially as the technology becomes more capable and powerful. It's not easy. We have to not just have wiser, smarter systems that use resources more efficiently, but we also have to have wiser systems about, what does it mean to have a meaningful life. So this is why I don't just say artificial intelligence in business. There's a lot more to it than just artificial intelligence in business. To make sure that we get the benefits and avoid the risks, this is where service science comes in. This is where understanding these other aspects of these complex systems is important. But we do know by about 2035, cars drive themselves. I think Elon Musk finally admitted to California that his cars can't drive themselves. He kept saying it was going to happen in 6 months, and I think the company said, no, our cars aren't able to drive themselves. But by 2035, they will be for sure. I mean, he's not saying that, I'm telling you. And it's mostly because of the regulatory stuff, the edge cases. It's pretty predictable that around 2035, we don't have to drive anymore. Cars will do it for us. Vehicles will do it for us. Water, no water shortages by 2035, because like Singapore, which recycles 99% of its water, all major cities will be recycling their water. Manufacturing is local again because of 3D printing, robotics. Energy, no energy shortages by 2035 because of artificial leaf, geothermal, and even small-scale nuclear reactor systems. There's some great advances coming there. And again, this is why you have to look at these funds that are investing in all of these next-generation technologies, even if you're not investing in them for returns. It's just like understanding Moore's law, just like understanding papers with code, where you see the technological trends. You got to understand where the money's going, because ultimately the money is driving, where do the advances happen most rapidly? They're happening in the areas that are able to secure the best investments. And energy is getting some fantastic investments. Batteries, for example. Construction, again, this is the Broad Group in China can build 30-story buildings in 15 days. I've told you how smart computers are going to be. Retail goes social, crowdfunded finance, healthcare. I want to shift over to questions in about 5 minutes, just so you know. I'm trying to wrap up here. Healthcare, all robotic surgery, 3D printed organs. Education, looks like a team sport. At Almaden Research Center, we're developing, and I think this will be in the news pretty soon, we're developing smartphones that have like microscopes on it, so you can drop a little drop of pond water and it starts identifying the species that are in the pond water. Imagine kids around the world having basically a microscope and telescope built into their smartphones with annotated information, so they can identify plants. They can, this is a tool that's going to be available to very, very young kids. So the idea that education is going to stay the same, no, it's going to look very much like a team sport, and even very young kids are going to have to become more responsible about the use of technology, about the use of data, and how to apply it beneficially for win-win games rather than irresponsibly. Even government works better by 2035. This is a little bit about the artificial leaf. Finland's VTT has this system for making food from air, which will help us with climate change. I'm getting older, so I want my exoskeleton, because this is the way people die, sadly, is they get old, their bones get brittle, they break a bone, they start getting socially isolated, maybe they even have to go to the hospital, they see all their older friends passing away, and they lose their will to live. So exoskeletons are going to be huge for extending human life. This is one technology I'm watching very closely the older I get. I was conceived in 1955. This was the phone on the wall in the farmhouse in Maine I grew up in. This was the rotary phone on my MIT dorm room desk. This was my first Nokia phone when I came to Silicon Valley. Now I have my smartphone. By 2035, I'll have my 100 digital workers. By 2055, what will I have? This was my first program in 1972. When I was leading IBM's global university programs, we gave 300,000 faculty and students around the world access to our artificial intelligence with cloud. So the building blocks are getting better, but we have to prepare for this world, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of what we expect from responsible entities trying to create better future versions of themselves. And I won't go into the intelligence augmentation, but a lot of interesting things that could be said about that. Won't go into the progression of how over the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see AI move from a tool to an assistant, to a collaborator, to a coach, to a mediator. But upskilling is going to be really, really key. And once the pandemic's over, Peter, you recognize the lobby in our building in San Francisco that you visited. Almaden's still there. I was just there yesterday picking up my mail, and it's still going fine. In fact, there was a film crew arriving at Almaden to film one of the new technological breakthroughs that are coming out of Almaden. So Almaden's still there, working away, and we still have our place in San Francisco. And let's open it up for questions. And I think I'll go back. I'll leave it right here.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much so far. I think it's fascinating to hear your many insights on AI and There are several things we could delve into. So just before your talk, Jim, Stephen gave a talk on the state of innovation in the United States. So I'd like to open up first for Steve to engage you in
Sure.
a little bit of discussion of how his talk connects with your talk. And then I open it up for the participants to ask questions, and preferably use the chat function, please. So Stephen, let's hear from you.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Jim, for that fantastic presentation as always. Let me ask a question that maybe joins two parts together. You talked wonderfully about having 100 digital workers, right? And that raises the question: if there will be quite significant disparities in the ability of individuals and of companies to be able to make use of these AI tools effectively, and may that, if not properly managed, lead to a very radical set of income inequality in the near term, just given the disparate ability of individuals between high and low income countries and even within society to use these technologies. And then maybe that also anticipates the last slide you had about I understand 30 nations now have actual national artificial intelligence strategies. Maybe you could take what those strategies do, or why countries put them in place, and how specifically they can help companies and individuals kind of move up this technology curve.
Excellent. Excellent. Stephen, you always ask the most important question. And and inequality is by far what is causing dysfunctional government. By far, it led to this ongoing nationalist thing that you see in the U.S. is caused by disparity and desperation and despair. Really, totally understandable, and it's as a result of disparity. I saw this cartoon. I've got to find it again. It shows this poor person with no cookies. Actually, I think it was an immigrant poor person, no cookies on one side of the table. An American worker with one cookie on his plate. And then sitting at the head of the table was this big guy with a plate full of cookies telling the poor immigrant, that guy wants your cookie. or telling the American worker, that immigrant wants your cookie. And his plate is overflowing with cookies. I got to put that in because that is the heart of the problem right now. This is why government is dysfunctional. And I am optimistic. I am optimistic because I see clearly that's the problem. I know that's the problem. So we got to solve that problem. And we can. There's nothing preventing us from solving that problem. One group has way too many cookies on their plate. There's this rest of the world, not Nordics, of course, because you're already kind of into that mode better than we are. But there's a lot of the world that has they're moving to a better place because they have no cookies. And then you got this, shrinking middle class that has maybe the one cookie, but, they think the way they're going to get two cookies is by pushing out the immigrant and the person who has even less. So how do we solve this problem? Well, it's not hard. It requires people who can communicate it better than I can, but that's why I'm hopeful that we'll solve it. Is that it's simply a case of winner take all strategies being rewarded, whereas improve weakest link is getting not enough. And this picture right here is the way I've summarized it over the last few years, because I show this picture. It looks like a little postage stamp, I'm sure, on your computer screen, and you can probably just barely make out there's somebody holding up a shirt with the number 12 on it. And the way I explain how we're going to solve this problem in government is that in the Bay Area, I show this little thumbnail picture and everybody goes, oh, that's Andrew Luck. He was the best quarterback at Stanford in American football, and he's holding up the jersey 12 because he's just joined the Indianapolis Colts. And what's remarkable about that picture is Andrew Luck was the best college football player that year, and the Colts were the very worst football team that year. And why is he standing on stage? Why is he smiling? Why is his family up on stage with him? And it's because he's going to be stinking rich. And the reason he's going to be rich is because the National Football League almost went out of existence because one team got so good. It had all the best players. All the best players wanted to work on the best team. It got so good it could beat all the other teams. Guess what? The franchise of football was going out of business because who wants to go watch the best team destroy the weakest team? And if we can figure this out in American football, American football has other problems, we can certainly figure it out for higher stake things than a mere game. And that's the problem. You put your finger right on it, Stephen. And there are enlightened people who will help us solve this problem, but there's a lot of other people who are not so motivated to solve the problem, and they have to be called out. And that's why I say we're going to produce more responsible entities in the future. We have to focus on greater responsibility, greater trust. And then most of these problems become pretty trivial, actually. But yeah, the technology will allow us to solve amazing things. But if we don't have the mindset of the people to be working towards more responsible future versions of themselves that can be more trusted, then yeah, it all falls apart.
And so maybe you can provide advice at the firm level. I use my think tank. We're 25 people. Obviously, not business enterprise, but what I mean, do I need to hire individuals with AI skills and bring them inside the organization? Can I use off-the-shelf AI tool sets to get the knowledge I need for machine learning? Is that enough to hire a data science? What do companies need to do to get AI skills into their organizations?
Yeah, I think it's more about this. I know this is a tough one, but we have to decompose this a little bit. The number one book you need to read is Dweck's book on a growth mindset. Arvind Krishna, when he became our CEO, he basically instituted courses on a growth mindset overnight. All managers first, all executives and all managers were trained on a growth mindset where learning becomes the focus. It's not that, oh, I can't do that. It's like, I haven't yet learned how to do that. And once you have the growth mindset, then you have to pay attention to all these different technologies. Hey, I'm an AI guy. Why do I have to learn about quantum computing? Hey, I'm an AI guy. Why do I have to learn about Internet of Things? Hey, I'm an AI guy. Why do I have to learn about blockchain? Well, everybody has to have a growth mindset. Everybody has to have an entrepreneurial attitude. Everybody has to have a wide view onto all of these technologies and how they might change. And guess what? Employee engagement, the number one thing that increases employee engagement. And by the way, most organizations' employees are only putting in about 40% of their energy into the organization. Employees with a growth mindset are fully engaged who are learning are putting in about 120%. I know that makes no sense, but there's studies out there that show if we can transform ourselves into more responsible future versions of ourselves and have a growth mindset so that we're really focused on learning, you're going to be getting a lot more out of your employees, but you got to give them learning pathways. You can't just be, oh, you're learning that? I don't want you to learn that. That has nothing to do with your job. Bad employee. No, it's like, oh, you have the initiative to try to learn something that would actually improve your life. Fantastic. I should give you a little bit more time to work on that. Of course, I need you to get this work done as well. And I'm going to hold you accountable because I'm your manager. But it's honest talks like that. It's not like, oh, well, you know, that might hurt your career. No, that'll help you long term. But I need you to get this done too, you know, honest. And so the other thing that Arvind talked about was radical candor. And I wish I could find it. There's some, just look out radical candor YouTube TED Talk or something like this. But you got to see this guy talk about radical candor. And he's got a little 2x2 table, so all you managers will love it. And but yeah, radical candor. That's what we need. More responsible entities that are able to have those hard conversations that need to be had. And we got to get out of this dysfunctional mode that when somebody's trying to improve themselves, that's taking cookies off my plate. No, that's going to put lots more cookies on your plate. So get with it, have radical candor, have growth mindset, learn all these technologies, encourage your people to have all these, but encourage them to be responsible. The company's not going to exist if they don't get their day job done. So yeah, it's, again, Stephen, you put your finger right on it. It's this transformation of the way, you know, the employee, the customer, the manager, you know, and this is why we need service science, because it's this transformation in the win-win games we play, you know, that's important, and how we talk about it and how we hold each other accountable, right? Why do you trust someone? Because you can hold them accountable, and they want to be accountable. If they're responsible entities, they want you to hold them accountable. I mean, that's, you know, you don't give your kids everything they want. you teach them to be independent, right? And you know, I've said, I don't know how many employees I've said this to, probably every single one of my employees. I would love to work for you someday. I think someday you may be my boss, because, you know, I'm going to the end of my career, but I see you at the beginning of your career, and there's this quality you've got, this quality you've got, that I would love to work for somebody like you someday. So it's that kind of thinking. It's a change. It's a change in thinking. It's a change in communication. It's a change in trust. It's a change in responsibility. And oh yes, technology can be used in powerful new ways if we can, let's see, where is it? If we can understand this slide. If we can understand we're getting generations of more intelligent technology, but what we really need to get the benefit of that is generations of more responsible people who are transforming themselves into better future versions of themselves. And I think we'll get there.
Okay.
I'm very
Yeah.
optimistic.
Okay, very interesting, thanks. So we have 3 questions at least for you, Jim. So it's Anine, and then Kristin, and then Ketil. Anine, please go ahead.
Okay, hi. So I'm just going to read it up. It's a quite long one. I just wanted to throw in an example to get it clear what I mean. But I'm wondering how we can make sure to develop AI technology that is diverse and inclusive, because I've heard so many different examples of technology gone wrong in a way, or for example, these automatic hand sanitizers that were only tested on white people, so they didn't react when a dark-skinned person were underneath and stuff like that. So I'm really curious about, are there any like strategies for this, for AI being developed as something inclusive and diverse as possible?
Yes, there are. And this is the trusted AI work that we're doing, looks at all of these issues. And the Linux Foundation, on my first slide, there was a connection to the Linux Foundation. So this is work that we're not doing alone at IBM. I mean, we are doing a lot on this diverse and inclusiveness. And if you look at our CEO, Arvind Krishna, you know, that's probably one of the highest values at IBM right now is diversity and inclusion. And not that we're doing as well as we need to, but totally, you know, in the messaging, in the top level messaging from our executive. In fact, Arvind wrote Biden a letter the day he was, you know, won the election, and diversity and inclusion was one of the 3 bullets in that message to Biden, that we have to improve, and corporations have to take responsibility for diversity and inclusion. if you look at the Linux Foundation AI and Data, we have a trusted AI committee. Swade Ouale from Orange in France, she's come up with a model that we're developing. So I would just encourage you to, you know, I can certainly, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I can give you like 3 pointers to organizations that have daily webinars on this topic. And they are exposing not only the hand sanitizer problems, but every time they see a problem, it becomes a new slide in their presentation. But they've also got the brain power to figure out, what are we going to do about this? How did this happen? You know, it's definitely a huge area of activity, and it is all about becoming a more responsible entity. So thank you. I mean, this is another great question. Lots going on in this area, and I'm happy to share with you the organizations that I think are driving it. Okay, I see.
Christian, and please let us know what you work with and what you find interesting in innovation.
Yes. Hi, it's a pleasure to have these amazing lectures today. I'm Kristin, and I work as a store manager at the Norwegian Vinmonopol. That's maybe known to you. That's where we sell all the wines and spirits, and it's a monopoly in Norway. Yes.
Oh, yeah, very good.
So, as you probably understand, as a monopoly, we are under a lot of regulations and a lot of old cultures, because this is a state-owned monopoly. So you were briefly discussing education and reskilling the workforce for everything that is expected of us in the future. So, and you obviously have a take on that, because you have done so many things. So on the topic of investing in education and reskilling of the workforce in general, what advice would you give to kind of facilitate this and to encourage this? And as with innovation, bring it higher up in the organization?
Yeah. Actually, on March 23rd, I'm running a panel for a European Commission sponsored event on upskilling. And if you haven't seen the World Economic Forum things on upskilling and their skills categorization, I can send you links to that. But I think it comes down to entities, and the entities are you, the individual, us, the individuals. There are businesses and the leaders in our business organizations, and there are government leaders as well. And I would throw universities in there as well. So think about those entities, and families, frankly. Families are a service system entity as well. Each of us has to come up with a service innovation roadmap, which is just a fancy word for a business model canvas about the investments we're making in 3 categories. And you can do this in 5 minutes. You can do it yourself. Just look at your day and you know, how much time are you spending on various activities? It's a little Tayloristic initially, but you know, how many books do you read a week? How many Coursera courses do you look at? How many, you know, are you just going through your day, doing your routine, you know, maybe optimizing a little bit, you know, oh, I can figure this and take a little less time. But what do you do with the time that you create when you do those optimizations? Do you have role models? I mean, that's very important. If there's not an entity that you're aspiring to be more like in the future, you know, that you see, oh, that better future version of me is right there. How are they doing it? How are they keeping up with their email? How are they finding time to learn in a drudgery job? These are the inspiring people. And I find so many role models. All my employees, my young kids that we just hired out of college, they're my role models. I'm going, man, how did you become a contributor on that open source project at the age of 22? How did you do that? That's extraordinary. I want to be like you. So yeah, I think we have to build our service innovation roadmap, and it's run, transform, innovate. Run is, and this is based on Jim March's exploitation, exploration, for anybody who knows the organization literature. But run is your routine habits. Transformation is, do I have a role model that I'm inspiring to be, and how much time am I making in my life to actually transform myself to be like that employee that I'm so impressed with. And then there's innovation time, which is, you know, every day I try to write down 3 ideas that I think will change the world for the better. Takes
Thank
5
you.
minutes. Takes 5 minutes, but it's something I do to try to come up with an innovative idea. Some of them are good enough that I actually tell other people about. Most of them I'm like, that'll never work, but oh well, it's an idea. But I do think we have to come up with our service innovation roadmap, even if we're in a traditional organization doing a traditional job. It's up to us to figure that out. And if everybody was doing it, imagine the conversations we would be having. We would all be learning from each other, and that's what we are. We're social animals. We learn for each other. Our brains are programmed with mirror neurons so that we can watch somebody doing something and learn how to do it faster, because that's how our brains are wired. We learn from each other. That's why our species has been so successful, is because we are so good at finding role models. But somehow that gets lost in the day-to-day, and you know, we just got to, I don't know, reformalize it. But no, maybe make it more the way it's just the normal culture. Thanks for the question, Christine.
Okay.
We're getting over time here.
Yeah, we're over time. Do you have time for one more question, Jim?
Sure, and I'll try to keep my answers shorter. I'll try to be
all right.
fast.
And so, Kjetil, please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks a lot for a great talk. I had a question here earlier to Stephen, but I'll just repeat that. I work with Norwegian tech policy. So my concerns are kind of basically mostly on the macro level, but at the same time, we advise a lot of businesses. So, and I really love the kind of the cartoon you described there with all the cookies ending up on one plate, which is really applicable to all levels, both in world context and businesses as well, because it's as applicable to small and medium-sized businesses versus the large ones as it is to countries and continents. So yeah. I really like that. And one of the things that Stephen mentioned earlier was that there was a prediction from Finland, or a report that mentioned that 50% of all value creation moving on from the next decade, I think it was, would be digital. And we also did a report in Norway that basically said that the value of data would be equal to the role of oil in the Norwegian economy within 2030. And so it's quite big, but the major issue we see is that we have an enormous lack of deep tech skills to actually realize and fulfill that value creation. And if we look into EU, there's still a lack of 750,000 people with deep tech skills. And so we're pretty much in the same situation there. And that means that the countries with the most of the skills and the companies with most of these people's skills are kind of getting all the cookies. And so I was just kind of curious to hear about, do you have any kind of reflections on how to address this issue in terms of the skills perspective? Because it's, I know this is a really hard nut for us to crack moving on. And it's,
Yeah, I think, and all of those entities, individuals, governments, businesses, small businesses, large businesses, universities, big universities, little universities, we all really have to get into this habit of building these service innovation roadmaps to become more responsible future versions of ourselves. And I don't know, I'm optimistic that we'll figure out how to do that. But I think that's the key, and it's got to be, it's got to have an element of improve weakest link. So you know, I've proposed many things over the years. I would like to see when the top student graduates from Harvard or MIT or Stanford or Cambridge or Oxford, I would like to see a program where if they go to the poorest university in Africa, the top student going to the poorest university, that they can earn a multiplication factor on any grant proposal that they put in. So if, yeah, you graduated from Harvard, you could go to Stanford, you put in your grant to the, and there has to be a global funding agency, which doesn't exist as well. And I can send you some links on setting up the global funding agency. But once the global funding agency exists, you know, you want the people to move to where they can have the most potential to improve the entity that they've become part of. That's what worked in sports. We figured it out. We can make it work for politics. We can make it work for education. It's about creating incentives that understand it's about, you know, the weakest entity has the most potential for improvement. I remember Ginny Rometty, our former CEO, I was in a meeting with her in San Francisco, and we were meeting with some leaders from Africa, and she said, today people think of the oil under the ground in your country as the most valuable resource. When I look at your country, I see the people as having the most potential for improvement of anywhere in the world. Imagine, you know, your nation, you know, we're 300,000 IBMers. That may seem like a lot. You're, you know, whatever it was, 10, 15 million people. You know, if 300,000 people in IBM can be building quantum computers, doing this, imagine what 30 million people could do, right? Far more valuable than the oil under the ground. I don't know about Norway's 2030 prediction, but I'm glad you mentioned that. But the point is, it's us. It's us. We are the most valuable resource on this planet if we can upskill and become more responsible entities. And I do think it is as simple as instituting things like motivating the people to go into the hardest situation. It's not just about, thank you, there you go. Careful, mate, that phone wants your cookie. I love that. It's just, that's the problem right there. This is, now imagine that guy, instead of this saying, you know, now imagine a bigger table where there's, you know, people with disparate amounts of cookies. And, oh, you've got a huge amount of, you know, intellectual power. They need it over there. So guess what? Every time you're over there helping them, I'm going to give you 2 cookies instead of 1 for the same, boom. Suddenly the world is like, oh, we got motivation to help each other. We've got motivation to trust each other. We got motivation to collaborate. We've got motivations to do all kinds of things that we don't have motivations to do today. So yeah, I think it's gonna be like, it's gonna go fast. It's gonna happen, and it's gonna be great. And I'm super optimistic about it. And the more people that know that is the problem, that cookie thing is, Stephen, you asked exactly the right first question. That cartoon demonstrates it. And boy, if you don't see that in the US today, you're blind. Sorry, you're just friggin' blind if you don't see what's going on.
Exactly right.
And I've got relatives who are, you know, supporting this nationalist movement, and it's so hard to explain to them, you are being manipulated. You are being manipulated. Wake up. Anyway, on that note, it's been fun. I have to run to my next thing.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Jim. And it's fascinating that you shared all these ideas and thoughts and insights. And when this talk started, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, your time. That's pretty generous to be starting your presentation at 5 o'clock in the morning. So that's an extra thank you. And I'm sure we all appreciate your talk very, very much. So thank you. Thank you for
No worries.
forever.
Happy to help. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, so neste post på programmet starter 3:30. Let's have a 15-minute break. Så klokken 3:30 så får vi da høre om utdanningssystemet i USA versus Norge. Vi var jo litt inne på dette her nå i samtalen med Jim Sporer. Da får vi høre fra Trond Petersen. Han er professor i sosiologi i Berkeley, men født og oppvokst her i Oslo, og har interessante observasjoner om utdanningssystemenes sterke svake sider både i USA og i Norge. Så da stopper vi opptaket nå. Bendik, og vi er tilbake igjen 15:30.